And then, of course, it ended up being, another one of these absolutely insane days in the Donald Trump presidency, right? Today was the 1001st day of the Donald Trump presidency. And even though the day started with this incredible news about Chairman Cummings, and you'd thought that might be an occasion for, perhaps a more sober, somber, restrained, quiet. No. The news proceeded today on what we are starting to think of as its normal, insane, careening path. Since the impeachment proceedings against the president began in the House, the president lost his Homeland Security secretary. He resigned last week. Now, today, he's lost another cabinet secretary. We've learned that his energy secretary is resigning. Now, I think it's fair to assume that there was no reason that the Homeland Security resignation should have been seen as anything to do with impeachment. He may have just been looking for a time when nobody would notice his departure. But with the expected resignation now of the Energy Secretary, Rick Perry, this does appear to have something to do with impeachment. At least it appears to be related news. Secretary Perry's resignation may also significantly affect his own role as a potential witness, a potential target of this ongoing investigation. That remains to be seen. But Rick Perry, as he announces his resignation today, he does seem to have been involved in the scheme for which the president is being impeached in a couple of ways. And I'll talk about those now both in turn. The first one is the one that I will concede is still like a little bit fuzzy. The second one is one that seems quite clear. The fuzzy one is super interesting, and I bet will turn out to be one of the most important things about all of this. But at this point, it's yet to come into clear focus. It has to do with these guys. These two gentlemen who were arrested last week in a criminal proceeding that increasingly seems to be a prosecutorial offshoot of the impeachment investigation. These guys were charged with funneling illegal campaign donations to the president's reelection effort and to a number of other Republican politicians from sources that included, apparently, some Russian somewhere who was giving illegal foreign campaign donations through these two to Republican campaigns and PACs. Their effort to funnel these illegal foreign campaign donations into Republican coffers appears to have been designed in part to get the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine fired, because she was apparently in the way of some of the schemes that these two guys were involved in Ukraine and in conjunction with the president's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani. Now, reporting about these guys and their operations around these political donations and their operations in Ukraine has since suggested that one of the schemes these guys were involved in is sort of a side hustle alongside the effort by President Trump and his lawyer to get Ukraine to help Trump in his reelection effort. Alongside that, these two guys who were just arrested seem to be trying to oust the leadership of a big natural gas company in Ukraine. They were trying to get the current board and executives out to replace them with their own people. NBC News reports that these two now arrested gentlemen were apparently carrying out that effort on behalf of a Kremlin-connected oligarch who's been tied to Russian organized crime, who's wanted in the U.S. on corruption charges. He's now fighting extradition. For some reason, though, this scheme also appears to have touched Rick Perry, the U.S. Secretary of Energy. He appears to have been somehow in on this game as well. Rick Perry reportedly suggested not just that existing board members of that natural gas company should be removed from their positions. He specifically had replacements in mind. He wanted to replace them with at least one Rick Perry campaign donor from the great state of Texas. So, as I said, that part hasn't yet come into sharp focus. I mean, what was going on there in that business deal to apparently benefit this wanted oligarch who's linked to the Kremlin, who U.S. prosecutors say is linked to Russian organized crime? He's in the natural gas business, basically at the Kremlin's behest in Ukraine. He's clearly trying to pull off he appears to be trying to pull off some sort of scheme involving that, using these guys connected to Rudy Giuliani who've now been arrested. Why is a U.S. cabinet secretary tied up in that, too? Rick Perry's involvement in that alleged scheme is still fuzzy. It may come into clearer focus during the course of the criminal case against those two guys who have now been indicted. We shall see. Secretary Perry himself has given a few statements to reporters, including to the Wall Street Journal last night, basically trying to explain away some of his apparent involvement in this scheme. But whatever was going on with him in that part of it remains mysterious. In addition to the criminal case against my friends Lev and Igor there on the left, USA Today and CNN have also reported in recent days that there appears to be not just this ongoing criminal investigation related to these guys and this overall matter in the Southern District of New York. There also appears to be a counterintelligence investigation into this matter, including one that touches directly on Rudy Giuliani, the president's personal lawyer. The basic question of most counterintelligence investigations is whether this might have been a foreign influence operation run by a foreign country or run by a foreign intelligence service targeting the U.S. government. You know, are there any foreign agents involved here who have been secretly working on behalf of foreign countries when they appeared to be doing other work here related to the U.S. government? I mean, we don't know. As I say, this whole thing about whatever was going on with this natural gas company in the middle of this scheme, this campaign donations, right, that were funneled to the president's reelection effort and to Republican campaigns appear to have been funneled in part through something that appeared to be a natural gas entity. Rick Perry, the Secretary of Energy, appears to have been involved in that effort somehow. But I will confess to you, whatever was going on there at this point doesn't yet seem totally clear. I expect that it will become clear as we learn the results of those ongoing investigations. And now, in the midst of this mess, Rick Perry, U.S. Secretary of Energy, is expected to resign. So that's one part of what is going on with Rick Perry here. The other part of it is much more clear, not fuzzy at all. Rick Perry, in this scheme for which the president was being impeached, was also self-professed one amigo of the three amigos. The three amigos were the guys who were reportedly given the brief of working out this scheme in Ukraine for President Trump once they got that pesky U.S. ambassador to Ukraine removed from the embassy and sent home. After Ambassador Marie Yovanovitch was pushed out, President Trump instead pushed these guys, the three amigos, to work on Ukraine instead of the U.S. ambassador. The three amigos were, on the right, Kurt Volker, who was President Trump's envoy to Ukraine. He has now quit his job and testified to the impeachment committees. Amigo number two was Energy Secretary Rick Perry, who has been subpoenaed to testify to the impeachment committees. He has not yet done so, but as of tonight, it's reported that he will be quitting his job soon as well. Amigo number three was a Trump inaugural donor named Gordon Sondland. He has no experience in government or diplomacy. He was nevertheless given the job of being the U.S. ambassador to the European Union. Mr. Sondland testified to the impeachment committees today. A long deposition that took roughly 9.5 hours. Sondland's deposition, like all of these thus far, was carried out behind closed doors, so we know very little about what these witnesses actually said in their testimony and how they responded to questions. In Gordon Sondland's case, though, we did get a big opening statement from him that was released to the public. And you can tell from reading through his opening statement, I think the basic idea here was for Gordon Sondland to make himself look as good as possible, try to make it seem like he definitely didn't realize he was right in the middle of carrying out this scheme for which the president is going to be impeached. He nevertheless does basically cop to the whole thing, even in his written statement, which he distributed to the press today. I mean, he spells it out. First thing he does is he says that he was acting on the orders of the president. Quote, on May 23rd, President Trump directed those of us present at the meeting to talk to Mr. Giuliani, his personal attorney, about his concerns about Ukraine. Quote, we were also disappointed by the president's direction that we involve Mr. Giuliani. Our view was that the men and women of the State Department, not the president's personal lawyer, should take responsibility for all aspects of U.S. foreign policy toward Ukraine. However, based on the president's direction, we were faced with a choice. And we chose to do what the president said and do this whole thing through Giuliani instead. He says, quote, as I stated earlier, I understood from President Trump at the May 23rd White House meeting that he wanted us to talk with Mr. Giuliani concerning our efforts to arrange a White House meeting for the Ukrainian president, President Zelensky. Taking direction from the president, as I must, I spoke with Mr. Giuliani for that limited purpose. In these conversations, Mr. Giuliani emphasized that President Trump wanted a public statement from President Zelensky committing Ukraine to look into anti-corruption issues. Mr. Giuliani specifically mentioned the 2016 election, including the DNC server and Burisma, as two anti-corruption investigatory topics of importance for the president. So, I mean, as you can tell, this is written in the most, forgive me, the most CYA language possible. Right? And this is from the one witness in the impeachment proceedings so far who was considered by Republicans to be their best hope, to be the sort of most loyal, Trumpiest of them all. But here he is confessing to sort of both parts of this that you would need to prosecute as a criminal case or to bring impeachment proceedings against the president. I mean, it's both parts, right? Here he is saying this was on direct orders from President Trump. President Trump said, I'm not going to do this meeting unless you satisfy Giuliani that I'm going to get what I want from them first. So they go to Giuliani, and then Giuliani then spells out what it is that the president wants, which is an investigation that he can use against Joe Biden. And he wants an investigation into, how did he phrase that exactly? What's the other thing? Quote, the 2016 election, including the DNC server, which is the weird conspiracy theory here that maybe the DNC, the Democratic National Committee's server that was hacked by Russia, isn't anywhere that you'd expect it to be. It's been secreted away to Ukraine because Ukraine invented the fact that Russia attacked our 2016 election and hacked the Democratic Party and all the rest of it. Something hidden in Ukraine can disprove that Russia actually committed that attack. The basic idea here of this part of what President Trump was trying to get from Russia is that he wants Russia to no longer be blamed for interfering in the 2016 election, for attacking the DNC servers, for hacking the Clinton campaigns and the Democratic Party's emails, for releasing them, for running the social media operation that they did to try to benefit Trump. President Trump wants the U.S. government's position on this to be that Russia definitely didn't do any of that. And that's from Gordon Sondland's opening statement. We don't know what happened in his deposition today after he made those opening remarks, but in his printed opening statement, he says the president did it. This scheme that the president and Rudy Giuliani were enacting using the three amigos, Gordon Sondland and Rick Perry and this guy Volker, who has already resigned, the scheme was to hold up a White House meeting for this foreign leader unless he coughed up stuff that Trump could use for his reelection effort against Joe Biden. And in addition to that, interestingly, he needed something else from them. He needed help unblaming Russia for the 2016 election attack. Why would they want to unblame Russia for the 2016 election attack? I mean, Russia's having kind of an amazing run of it right now when it comes to stuff they're getting from the Trump administration. I mean, this weird plot that's emerging over the impeachment proceedings, so that we've got Trump and Rudy Giuliani with an amazing cast of supporting characters. They're pressuring Ukraine to, yes, help President Trump against the Democrats for 2020, but they're also pressuring Ukraine to help the U.S. government come up with some sort of alternate revisionist history that suggests that Russia didn't actually interfere in the 2016 election. That appears to be part of what they were trying to do in Ukraine. It also appears to be the goal of Attorney General William Barr, who's been traveling around the world with his hand-picked, supposedly independent prosecutor, who's been assigned by Barr to investigate the origins of the Russia investigation, and specifically the intelligence community's assessment that Russia actually attacked that election. Barr and Durham appear to be traveling the world trying to both question and muddy up the intelligence community's unanimous assessment that Russia did attack the election in 2016 to benefit President Trump. I mean, Russia did attack the 2016 election to benefit President Trump. If you don't believe me, believe the bipartisan Senate intelligence report, which was just released a little more than a week ago in the middle of these impeachment proceedings. I mean, that's a Republican-led committee. That's a bipartisan report. Yeah, Russia did it. The intelligence community was right in that assessment. Even after that, why is the U.S. government, from the president to his kooky personal lawyer to the attorney general, all bending over backwards, working triple time now to try to say, no, Russia didn't commit that attack after all? While Russia is benefiting from that kind of incredible manpower at the top levels of the U.S. government on their behalf, at the same time, Russia just got what it has been hoping for, wishing for, working for in the nation of Syria for years, just handed to them by the Trump administration. Vladimir Putin and the Russian military have been propping up their ally, the Syrian dictators, Bashar al-Assad, for years. Their stated goal has been to reestablish Assad's control of all of Syria out to all of its borders. Well, about a third of the nation of Syria, about a third of Assad's country, has been out of his control for years because it was controlled by the Kurds that we were allied with instead of Assad's government, right? They had our support to do so. until this past week, when President Trump announced that the U.S. government would be turning tail and abandoning the Kurds, pulling out U.S. troops, inviting Turkey to come into the territory and wipe them out. Turkey got what it wanted. The Syrian government, backed by Putin and the Russian military, they were able to come in and seize back basically a third of that country. Basically, at the invitation of the U.S. government, here, free play. Here you go. I know we've been supporting the Kurds who've been holding this territory for years now, but you can have it now. Anything else you'd like? At the same time, it hasn't received as much attention, but after President Trump's pressure on Ukraine to help him with his reelection effort, this thing for which he is now being impeached, President Trump also publicly pressured the same president of Ukraine that he needed to do a new deal with Putin, that Zelensky needed to do a new deal with Putin to settle the war that Vladimir Putin started in Ukraine when he invaded Ukraine and seized part of it, seized Crimea to make it part of Russia. He thereafter sent Russian proxies to start occupying the eastern part of Ukraine. This has been an ongoing 5-year-long war. Thousands of people have died. After Trump publicly pressured Zelensky to help him in his reelection effort, Trump publicly pressured Zelensky to do a deal with Putin to settle this ongoing conflict. Zelensky, in fact, signed up to a new deal with Russia, very much on Russia's exact terms, after Trump publicly pressured him to do it. That has led, among other things, to these large protests in the main square in Kiev this past week, with Ukrainians asking why their new president is capitulating to Russia in that deal after 5 years of war. Well, maybe it has something to do with the fact that their strongest military ally, the United States, just told them they needed to do it after withholding hundreds of millions of dollars in military aid until President Trump could extract some favors from that government having to do with his next reelection effort. I mean, what might Putin want from the U.S. government that he's not getting? In recent weeks, President Trump has also advocated insistently that Putin had to be allowed back into the G7, that the G7 should become the G8 again. Putin was kicked out after he invaded Ukraine and took Crimea. Putin is advocating for them to be let back in. The Washington Post reports that in a phone call to the UK, President Trump argued and wouldn't let it go, that Russia shouldn't be blamed for the attempted assassination in the UK of an ex-Russian intel guy who defected to the West, who was attacked in a British town with a Russian nerve agent by 2 Russian GRU officers. President Trump has been arguing to the British government, we have now learned, that he's not so sure Russia did that. Why is everybody blaming Russia for that? Just today, a surprise announcement from the Russian news service, TASS, that according to the FSB in Russia, the U.S. government has now agreed to carrying out joint cyber operations with Russian intelligence. What? Remember the disastrous joint press conference that Trump and Putin gave in Helsinki last year? Remember, one of the things the president proposed a whole bunch of stuff at that meeting. Remember, he proposed his incredible offer in which he said he would let Russia come to the United States, Russian intelligence officers, Russian security services, let them come to the United States to interrogate Americans, like former U.S. Ambassador Michael McFaul, because Russia said that those Americans had been interfering in Russian affairs. He was inviting the Russians to interrogate U.S. citizens. In addition to offering up Americans to the Russian security services on a platter, President Trump also suggested that the U.S. and Russia would join forces to fight cybercrime. As Politico reports in that headline, this was widely ridiculed at the time. This would be a little bit like the New York City Police Commissioner announcing a joint crime-fighting effort with a really excellent group of mobbed-up bank robbers. Hey, you know what? We're interested in fighting crime, and these guys know crime. I mean, we're going to do, after what they did to us in 2016, we're going to go in a joint cyber effort? Sure. I mean, Trump was laughed off the stage for both of those proposals. But now, today, quietly, news from a Russian state media outlet that the U.S. government has agreed to do some sort of joint cyber operations with our Russian adversaries. Tell me more. No, not you, Russia. I don't want to hear more from you. I'd like to hear more from our government about that. So Russia's having like a bang-up time right now. Like, I don't know what's going on, but it's like cashing in time for Russia. They seem to be getting everything they could conceivably want from the U.S. government. I mean, somebody should go keep an eye on Alaska. Somebody go lock the back door in Alaska, just in case we haven't already. I mean, for some reason, all of a sudden, Russia does seem to be getting everything they might conceivably want from the U.S. government, all in a rush. And that may just be coincidence. It may have something to do with the president's fate looking increasingly dark in this impeachment proceeding. But things do just continue to fall further apart every day, both in the impeachment proceeding and in the kinds of policies that are supposed to be running alongside this investigation. I mean, the White House Chief of Staff, Mick Mulvaney, gave this remarkable briefing today at the White House in which he sort of blithely asserted that, yes, in fact, the president did do it. There was a quid pro quo with Ukraine. In order for them to get a meeting with the White House, in order for them to get military aid, they had to give the president some of what he wanted in terms of these investigations. Yeah, he did it. There was a quid pro quo. So what?
Did he also mention to me in the past that the corruption related to the DNC server? Absolutely. No question about that. But that's it. And that's why we held up the money.
That's it. That's why we held up the money. We held up the money to Ukraine so the president could get this other thing that he wanted from Ukraine for his own political purposes. I mean, that led to these very blunt headlines all over the country today, right? The New York Times. Mulvaney says, then denies that Trump held back Ukraine aid as quid pro quo. Washington Post, after saying Trump held back aid to pressure Ukraine, Mulvaney tries to walk back comments. Mulvaney says holdup of Ukraine aid was tied to Trump's demand for DNC server. Whether Mick Mulvaney was told today to go out and say that so he could be blamed for this whole thing, or whether he freelanced it in the moment, I mean, the response wasn't good. The Wall Street Journal reporting today, quote, White House officials had expected Mr. Mulvaney to repeat the administration's message that the House inquiry had been unfair to Mr. Trump and that there was no quid pro quo. One Republican lawmaker telling the Washington Post, quote, totally inexplicable. He literally said the thing the president and everybody else said did not happen. Soon enough, Mr. Mulvaney had taken back his comments and insisted that he'd never said them in the first place. Quote, there was never any condition on the flow of the aid related to the matter of the DNC server. Yeah, why would we have ever thought that you were implying today that the DNC server is why you were holding up the money? Why would we have ever believed that?
Did he also mention to me in the past that the corruption related to the DNC server? Absolutely. No question about that. But that's it. And that's why we held up the money.
That's it. That's why we held up the money. I never said that's why we held up the money. You fake news. He literally put out a statement saying we definitely didn't hold up the money because of the DNC server. We held up the money because of the DNC server. I mean, this is falling apart and badly, as is U.S. policy on all levels. I mean, for what has just happened in Syria. The president today overtly endorsing the notion that the Turkish military will, in his words, clean out the Kurds from the area of northern Syria that the Turks just invaded. It's almost literally an endorsement of ethnic cleansing from the president when one ethnic group needs to be cleaned out of an area. That's where we got the idea of ethnic cleansing. The president endorsing that overtly today. Right? I mean, everything from that to the other thing that Mick Mulvaney was sent out to the podium to announce today, which is that the U.S. government will host the next G7 summit at the president's personal property in Florida. The U.S. Constitution just bluntly says you cannot do that. You cannot take foreign payments as your president of the United States. You cannot profit from the presidency like that. You just can't. The president announcing, you know what, we're going to hold the G7 at Doral. It's the only place in America that will work. And no, I'm not going to tell you any of the other places that we looked at. I'm just taking the money. I mean, I don't know if they're trying to shoot the moon or goad the Democrats into moving even more aggressively on impeachment than they already are. I don't know. But today felt like a turning point for a lot of reasons. It feels like this thing is coming off the rails entirely and fast and that nobody is immune. It's an alarming time in U.S. politics. I don't take any glee in any of the stuff going so badly for these people who are screwing up so badly. This is serious stuff. But this just feels like a completely out of control process now. Stay with us.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.